Hello, everyone. This is What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Today, I am on with John from Christianity on the Spectrum. We're going to be talking about how we define the word Christian. So everybody wants to know, is a Mormon a Christian? That's a hot topic right now. Is Daniel McClellan a Christian? Or CJ Cornthwaite? I probably butchered that name. But these are two popular people that have been claiming that they are a Christian online, but then they also think that most of the Bible is not historical and don't think Jesus rose from the dead. So what's going on there? And today I have my friend here, and we're going to be talking about this topic, how to define it. He actually takes the position, we'll get to it later, that maybe a little bit more similar to someone like Daniel McClellan, who doesn't think a big part of the Bible is historical, that we can't really know a ton from the Gospels, and how he is still a Christian is a really interesting question for a lot of people. So maybe this can give us a good idea of how to understand the topic of what other people are thinking about this from maybe sociological perspectives or maybe just conservative perspective in general. So how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Yeah. So my name is John. I do a lot of things, but on the internet and my public facing persona, I do autism and Christianity research. So for the last 10 years, I have been looking specifically at the intersection of autism and Christianity and looking at why autistic people are significantly less likely to be religious than their non-autistic counterparts when you control for other factors. And then also looking at what it's like for those who are religious and how they sort of interact with Christian traditions in ways that are atypical in many cases, to put it mildly. So that's sort of who I am, and that's what I do. But yeah, I don't know if Dan McClellan would like to be grouped in with me, but sure, let's go with that.
Yes. It's a specific group, and you guys all believe the same thing. So,
yes, yeah, exactly.
And you're definitely a Mormon, John. All right, so
Force Mormon. Okay,
that's right, baby. That's right. So, and for people in the comments, feel free to say your meanest, just darkest thing, and John's going to destroy your argument or something.
Yeah, with facts and logic. I watched a lot of Ben Shapiro videos when I was like in 2016, so I've got that down. Don't worry.
Awesome. All right, so just a quick question for you. So when people use the word Christian, what do you think they usually mean?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of those questions that I pretty much have been fighting with ever since I started doing my research, right? Because really, what is a Christian? It depends on who you're asking. It depends why you're asking the question. Words themselves do not have any sort of inherent meaning. They have conveyed meaning that gets imbued into a word when you start to use it. For example, if you said, we absolutely killed that team last night, from context, that killed doesn't mean kill in a metaphor, in a literal sense. But if you said, like, I killed my best friend last night, that might have slightly different implications of a far more sinister nature. And so, like, I don't think words themselves are imbued with specific meaning, and it's all about the context in which you use them. And so Christianity has a lot of different definitions. Like, sometimes it is a word that is used by Christians to delineate the internal boundaries of the people that they consider part of their in-group. Sometimes it's used to describe a sociological phenomena, to describe a particular subsection of Abrahamic monotheism. And in some cases, it's used as, a personal definition to talk about a personal set of ethics or a behavior. Sometimes it's used to talk about a tradition and belonging to a tradition. And, you can go all sorts of places where being a Christian means a lot of different things, especially if you go into parts of the world where there's interreligious ethnic conflict. Being a Christian might just mean you belong to the Christian ethnic group in that region. You see this a lot in places like the Middle East, and also like the Balkans and other places like that, where Christianity is also a political identity and a political marker. that sort of associates you with a particular group or a particular political orientation. In places in the U.S., calling yourself a Christian is pretty much synonymous with calling yourself a Republican. And so if a person asks, are you a Christian? They might not be asking, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead bodily? They might be asking you, like, are you aligned with me politically? And so personally, when I'm doing research, I use two definitions. So the first one is a sort of broad sociological definition to say you are part of a particular form of religious tradition that all sort of stem from this one place. And that's sort of the early Jesus movement. If you are somehow downstream from that, you're Christian. And then the other definition that I use is self-identity. So if you call yourself a Christian, sure, you're a Christian, whatever. I'm not going to argue with you about that, because that's also like a interesting piece of data, right? If someone says they're a Christian, it's like, okay, well, you are taking on that label to mean something about yourself. So what does that actually mean? And what are you trying to convey to me when you say that? And so, like, in my research, I meet a lot of people who other Christians would not consider Christian, but they themselves consider themselves Christian. And so I just go, sure, you're a Christian because this is the identity that you have chosen to identify yourself as. But those definitions don't work when I'm talking to like my conservative evangelical relatives and I say this person's a Christian. They'll immediately say, no, they're not a Christian, because to be a Christian means to have a personal relationship with Jesus. And that person doesn't have a personal relationship with Jesus, therefore they're not a Christian. And, all sorts of permutations and combinations of that.
Well, that's heresy, obviously, John. So
yeah.
Please be careful about heresy. Now,
yes.
Just for some clarity, John is not LDS. That was a joke.
No. I'm Anglican.
Okay.
Anglo-Catholic specifically. So.
Well, hey,
there you go.
Hey, we'll see by the end of this discussion. Okay, gosh.
But are Anglo-Catholics Catholic or are they Anglican? Anyway, it comes to the same problem, right?
My Protestant brain can't handle that. Okay, gosh.
Yeah. Well, the Anglo-Catholics think they're Catholic, but the Catholics don't think the Anglo-Catholics are Catholic, and the Anglicans think that the Anglo-Catholics are Anglicans, and so it's sort of like another weird definitional boundary issue where the self-identity of the group says they belong to a group that the larger group doesn't accept, similar to how like Mormons and Christians Mormons are like, yeah, we're Christians, and then a lot of like the mainstream Christians will be like, no, you're not. And that's mostly like a conflict over boundaries and definitions. And one group is trying to internally police the other, and the other group is trying to invoke a more porous definition of the term. So
you might find this interesting. So a popular YouTube channel of which I guess I'm friends with. Yeah, so Than and IP Michael Jones. Than made a video arguing that Mormons are atheists. So
oh wow, I'm sure that was shocking to many of them.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. We can take that and leave it like that for now. So next question there. So is Christian primarily a theological claim, social identity, a way of life, or something else? You kind of described that. How would you answer that question though?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things, and it's either all of those things, one of those things, a combination of some of them, or none of them, depending on what the person asking is trying to get at, right? So when I'm talking to conservative Christian audiences and they ask, are these people really Christians? When I'm talking about like some of the more out there forms of autistic Christians, the answer to them would be no. And so, because for them, Christianity is specific adherence to a set of propositions. And if you do not assent to these propositions, you are not in the club. like, or other Christians will say the Nicene Creed is the boundary. And so if you can't say the Nicene Creed, then you're not a Christian. But in reality, when we use the term, it has so many different uses and different definitions that it could feasibly be all of those things, one of those things, a combination of them, or like none of them and mean something else entirely. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that'll help us guide our conversation. It seems like you're saying that, or at least what I'm hearing is that in a lot of ways, definitions just mean however people use them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And like words go, it's sort of like there's a common consensus of what words mean in your context. So, if today you were to say a person is gay, that has a particular connotation about sexual orientation. If you were to call someone gay 200 years ago, that might not have the same connotation of like homosexual sexual orientation or something like that. And so what terms mean are mostly like what the consensus understand and interpret those terms to be. And there's sort of like a back and forth social contract that you are engaging in when you're speaking and you're using words, that you're both on the same page. And then if you stop and are no longer on the same page, then you have to like stop the conversation and you each have to define what you're meaning by your terms. And so like I don't think words have any particular set definitions, but their definitions are in how they are used and what concepts they're trying to invoke.
Yeah. And I think that most people should be able to pretty obviously agree with that for the most part, in regards to like the way that psychologists or sociologists use this word Christian, where it's not necessarily about what you think about whether you're being saved or something like that, or any of those concepts. It's much more about like, do you claim to be a Christian? Because otherwise it's really, really difficult to do sociological research if you're having to account for all these 17 different beliefs that you have.
Yeah.
Or your
and
actions.
Like in my case in particular, I'll give you an example of how this gets very difficult. So a lot of Christians will say, you are a Christian if you believe the Nicene Creed, or if you accept the Nicene Creed. And that's great, right? Like if that's what you want to say, that's what you want to say. If that's your definition of how you internally police the boundaries of your in-group, then by all means go for it. But I do a lot of surveys asking people about, their particular stances on parts of the Nicene Creed. And I will have some guys who, autistic people sometimes develop very specific interests and narrow topics and get really into them. And a lot of times autistic Christians will get really into Christianity, and they will read about the formulation of the Nicene Creed and realize that within the Nicene Creed, there are some like Neoplatonist assumptions about substance and essence and things like that. And they'll say, well, I'm not a Neoplatonist. And so when the Nicene Creed says being of the same substance with the Father, like I don't agree with the underlying conceptual framework of homoousios. And so no, in that sense, I don't. However, they still sort of affirm the spirit of what's being said. They just disagree with the underlying, metaphysical assumptions of the idea that there are substances and essences. And so is that guy a Christian because he has like metaphysical questions about whether Neoplatonism is valid, or is he not? I don't know. Like most people would say, yeah, that's close enough. But like, where's the line, right? Like where are you going to draw these hard distinctions? And the answer is it's sort of just arbitrary. Like every time you try to make a definition, especially about a complex and heterogeneous religion like Christianity, you're always going to be defining some people who are reasonably part of the in-group out of it, or you're going to be including people who wouldn't be considered part of that group into it, just because the boundaries of this term are quite porous and not conceptually well defined. And so yeah, it's sort of a long answer there, but it's complicated.
Yeah. Another thought. Simone reads text. I would think that homoousian is more Aristotelian terminology, though it's true that framework is taken up by Neoplatonism. Not that I'm looking to get a debate there, but people can look into that themselves.
Yeah, I am trying to relay the things that were relayed to me, not necessarily enter the debate of whether homoousios is an Aristotelian framework or a Neoplatonist. Whatever it is, the person explaining that to me was particularly interested in rejecting Neoplatonism. So
next time on What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Just a brief thoughts here. So I want this conversation to be not as hostile as it usually is. So usually in this conversation, you have people yelling at each other. It's like, hey, you're not a Christian, you're a Mormon, and you're just, that's not okay. And there's a lot of, like, as you were talking about, like boundary management of hey, like, this is my group, you can't be in my group. And it's very hostile sometimes. So in other words, so when for people in this discussion, whatever your opinion is, I'm not too concerned about necessarily, but what I want people to do is to be able to look at this conversation, take out the emotional aspects of it, and think of it kind of like if we were debating about what a Buddhist is. So you have philosophical Buddhists, cultural Buddhists, practicing Buddhists, but nobody's yelling at YouTubers saying you aren't a Buddhist, you're that other religion, or you're actually atheist, you're not a Buddhist, because they don't think Buddhist is historical or Buddha is historical or something. So in other words, I think this brings us to why people are hostile. This is something very important that people need to think about and analyze in their emotions as they're having this conversation. So one reason would be that people feel threatened by ambiguity because our identity is who we are as a Christian. This is actually something I was thinking about as myself. So, I grew up in the whole evangelical atmosphere, and I'm pretty 100% sure that I told people that they were Mormon that they're not Christian. I can't remember. I don't know. And I was trying to think about, like, what was going on in my head when I was thinking that. And it's interesting because a Mormon, you'd be like, okay, that's not okay. You can't call yourself a Christian. Like, that bothers us. But then an atheist is like kind of far out. It's like, okay, most atheists are not going to be saying, hey, I'm not a Christian. It's like, it just doesn't really bother us. Just I don't know. Maybe you can clarify what I'm saying in a second here, but in other words, there doesn't seem like a threat from people outside of our group, or people that are kind of on the edges, or maybe want to be part of the group that kind of aren't in the group. Or it's like, when we get our boundaries, we don't like the ambiguity just as human beings. So someone like who is maybe a Mormon, or maybe someone like yourself, John, might be seen as a threat. And I'm trying to explain why that is a threat, because it's almost uncomfortable, because when someone like a Mormon says they're also a Christian, that triggers something else inside of us that maybe thinks us that hey, if they are the bad guy, the Mormons are the bad guys, then of course they're not part of our group. But then you have this Mormon who's the bad guy saying, hey, they count as a Christian, and that makes things not ambiguous anymore, or it makes things ambiguous. It's like, well, that doesn't seem right. That can't be right. And then, or maybe like they could cause like doubts, like, well, I don't know what a Christian is. And if I don't know what a Christian is, then I don't know who I am, because they're challenging who a Christian is in general. Like, these aren't something like we actively think about, kind of like subconscious thoughts of doubts and insecurities, I guess. But it can be an attack on your identity. And another thing is, when someone uses the label, they are rejecting core claims, it can feel like they are free riding on the moral capital of the group. In other words, like, if I and my Christian friends, we think that we're doing the right moral thing, and then someone comes along and says, hey, I'm a Christian, it's almost like they're trying to get that moral aspect of it, like to say, hey, I'm good. But it's like, no, you're not doing the same moral thing. And that might make us feel uncomfortable, or they're diluting what we've worked for our identity. And so maybe not everybody's had those thoughts, but maybe those could be reasons why people don't like this conversation of hey, is this person in our group or are they not? And that might make us feel comfortable. Do you have any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, so I think that's one aspect of it where just the ambiguity makes people uncomfortable. But I think the sort of underlying reason why it makes people uncomfortable is because there are stakes, right? So if you know, even if there aren't stakes, you will get people who are uncomfortable with ambiguity, like it's sports teams or identification with sports teams.
Right.
They'll be like, you're not a real fan, or you're not a true fan, or you just bandwagon hop. And that's a lot tied into like your personal identity. Like you staked a lot in this, you put down a lot of effort, you invested in it, and now someone, like you said, is trying to come along and ride on the coattails of all the hard work and sacrifice that you put in for this. But I also think that when it, at least when it comes to Christianity, a big portion of it is that if you are a Christian, you believe that there are stakes to belief or not belief, and there are consequences to either being within the church or not being within the church. And when you believe that, it really matters who's in and who's not, right? Like your salvation might be at stake. And I mean, we talk about Mormons, but like there you can find particular forms of Baptists who will ask, are Catholics Christian? And for most people, they're like, yeah, obviously they are. But I have met Baptist friends who are unsure if the Catholics are Christian.
Oh no, I grew up and they were definitely not Christian.
Yeah,
there were some confused Catholics that were Christian, confused Catholics, but the real Catholics were not Christian.
Yeah, and like that's like a fairly common one again, and the reason that there is that barrier there is because if you are a conservative Baptist, you believe that there are consequences to not being in the group, and other people should be in the group. And so you want them to know that they're not part of you and they need to come over to you. So I think that's another thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other factors you mentioned, I think also go into it. Like also people kind of like belonging to exclusive clubs and don't like having to associate with people they don't want to associate with, right? Like the hipster problem of like, I was there before it was cool, or whatever, or like, you get in really into a band when it's niche, and then now all of a sudden it blows up and everyone else starts joining, and you're like, man, why do I have to associate with these people now? And now all the uncool normies are associating with me. So what am I going to do? But yeah, so I think a big portion of it is, if you believe these things are tied to your salvation or your lack thereof, and that there will be real world consequences to following or not following, then your desire to police boundaries, I think, significantly increases.
Yeah. And just a reminder, the reason we talk about all this is because it's important to be aware of the emotions and maybe possible outside reasons why you might be having this conversation, or what could be motivating why you say specific things. So if you're uncomfortable because you think this Mormon is basically the devil, or this Catholic is basically the devil, and that's why you don't want them to be a Christian, I mean, that's okay. Of course, like, you're welcome to believe that, right? But that's not a specific reason why they couldn't be called a Christian. Like, unless you've seen this Catholic doing immoral things, you just assuming that they're the devil because they're Catholic is not a reason to say that they're not a Christian, right?
Yeah. I do think there is some legitimacy to internal boundary policing, right? Like if you want a community and you want to establish that community, at some point you're going to need to have rules, right? Communities typically need some sort of way to identify other people within those communities. And so it's not that I think it's illegitimate to set up rules. It's that I think it's arbitrary what the distinction is. And so just as long as you recognize that you are making an arbitrary distinction, I think it's fine. But I think one of the big problems that comes into these conversations is people don't recognize they're making an arbitrary decision, and they think they are, divining the truth in the way that they like set up their community boundaries. And it's sort of like, well, I think that's more made up than you might think. Like I think this is mostly a socially constructed thing rather than a discovered divine revelation of who is and who is not.
Yeah, and for my audience, I know you guys are waiting for John to just get destroyed with his silly arguments of Christianity and such. But we've got to get some preliminary questions out of the way, okay? So who has the authority to define what a Christian is? So you could think of church council.
No.
Well,
I'm joking.
maybe church councils, scripture communities, or individuals themselves. In church councils, maybe like a pope, like myself or something, might be like, hey, I define who a Christian is, or I don't know how Catholics define that or how they figure that out. Or scripture, you can look at maybe scripture. And what does scripture say about who a Christian is, which is difficult because it only uses the Greek word for Christian just a couple of times. That's a little odd and interesting. Or communities. So I could definitely, as you were saying before, like any community, say like a church or just a club in general, has to have some kind of rules. So in that way, they do have some authority, and like legal authority specifically, right? Because if it's their property, then they can kick you out if they want, right? Or individuals. So what are your thoughts on that? Who has authority?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of those problems where it's like, well, I think the sort of distinctions between who is and who isn't are a bit arbitrary, and so it's largely who is like the ultimate authority is the group consensus, right? It is the in-group consensus of who is a Christian, who is not, is how the in-group defines who is and who is not. But even in there, you get problems because, when a group schisms and half of them say you're a Christian and you're not a Christian, who do you go with? And the answer is there is no way to know. You sort of just have to arbitrarily make distinctions. So like are Gnostics Christians, like the ancient Gnostics, or were the Arians Christians, or are they a special secret category called heretical Christian? I don't know. Like it is mostly like what we're doing here is we're doing taxonomy, and taxonomy by its very nature is arbitrary. And whenever you're drawing a taxonomy, what you're doing is you aren't really establishing what the truth is. You are establishing a common set of terms that you can all agree with so that you can talk about things in more complex abstractions. And so, when I say a Christian is someone who belongs to a church that follows the Nicene Creed or something like that, I'm essentially making an arbitrary distinction so that when I say Christian going forward, people know which groups I'm talking about. And so, do I have the authority to rule Mormons out of Christianity because they don't adhere to the Nicene Creed? No, I don't. But when I'm using the term, I ultimately do, because I'm the one telling, I'm the one trying to convey meaning to you, right? And I'm trying to get an idea in your head from my head using arbitrary conceptual ideas and your acceptance of those things. And so ultimately, I mean, who decides what a Christian is dependent on which group of Christians you're talking to, because the consensus of those groups will change from place to place.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to think about how it is heard. So people hear the word Christian in different ways. So theologians might hear the word Christian as a truth claim, as in like, this is what a Christian is, people that believe these specific things about Christianity. Sociologists might hear it as an identity claim about, what you're claiming is your identity. believers might hear it as some kind of covenantal loyalty, and then critics of the Bible might hear it as cultural power. So, yeah, maybe they see the negative of that, what they think are the negative effects of this definition of Christianity, and they think, okay, Christians are cultural power, just abuse. So people also hear the word differently too. So it's not always about what someone is speaking. But I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are on what is a good definition. So I've come up with some notes, and maybe you can help me narrow this down, or people in the audience can give us a better idea of what is a good definition, so we can kind of work towards a good way to define Christianity. So, or Christian. So I would think that a good definition should communicate effectively. So like you were talking about how it's kind of agreed upon by a large amount of people, and that's helpful, because if it's not agreed upon, then when you say a word, it doesn't necessarily have good meanings, or it's not clear. So like if I said that I believe in Buddhism, but I actually mean I believe that people walked on the moon, well, that's just a completely meaningless, or it's got meaning, but it's just a completely confusing word. It's like, obviously that's not a good definition. So would you agree that a good definition is going to communicate effectively?
Yeah, yes, clear intent understood by everyone basically would, yeah, it's clear what the person is trying to indicate when they say it, or there's at least some usage of it. Again, like you get into a lot of very weird questions around that because it's often culturally contingent, but yeah, that's
right. As you were saying before, even in evangelical circles, there's all kinds of different understandings of what a Christian is. So
yeah,
that makes things difficult. So a good definition makes it clear what it is and is included. So avoids vague language, but that's also difficult because you're talking about or I don't know, maybe a good definition does have kind of some vague boundaries. I'm not sure about that. Another mention it. So like as you were saying, like, yes, maybe people might not think Arians were Christians, but say hypothetically, I think that you have to lose you can't lose your salvation, or you're not a Christian, or you're not saved. Someone actually told me that. One of my good friends growing up was like, Zach, I don't believe that someone can be saved if they don't believe that they can lose their salvation. And I'm just like, that's very odd. I don't have any idea where you're getting that. Like at all. And I was very like, is Jesus going to be like, no, you don't believe you can lose your salvation. You're not getting in the pearly gates now. Go ahead and walk back down the hill, I guess. But like in that regard, I think there just clearly should be some vague boundaries, like, or at least maybe like I don't know, maybe I should understand him as Christian, maybe it's not. What do you think about that? Like, should there be some kind of vague boundaries, or should it be like a hard, like, hey, these people, if you do this or believe this, they're not considered a Christian?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're using the term to do, right? So in my research, I do not use hard boundary definitions of Christianity, because if I were to draw hard boundaries, then that would make my research significantly more complicated than it needs to be, right? And so for my research work, I basically just stick to a definition that's rather porous, because that's really all I need it to do. But if, again, you're trying to establish a group, you're trying to get something done, if you want like a practical, pragmatic definition for organizing a community around a certain thing, then yeah, I'd say hard boundaries are probably necessary at some point.
Interesting.
But yeah, so again, a lot of like what makes a good definition is going to be like, why are you using the term, and what is your sort of goal for the term? Is it to, organize a community? Is it to analyze and understand a cultural phenomena? Is it to self-define personal belief? Is it to sketch out broad alignment with a certain moral framework or something like that? But yeah.
Mhm.
The hardness or softness of the boundaries in your definition are going to be largely dependent on why you're using it, and it can mean if your definition has really hard boundaries and it's not an appropriate context to use it, then it's a really bad definition, right? But if it has very porous boundaries, but you need hard ones, then having that would make it bad. But
yeah. As I was thinking about this, I think there at least should be just a way, like out of bounds obvious thing. Maybe there's some ambiguity in our on how understanding it, but there are some obvious things, like for example, maybe the Christians that were following Hitler, that were doing a bunch of terrible things in the World War. Maybe I mean, I'm not a history nerd,
yeah.
but assuming that there were a bunch of Christians that were doing a bunch of terrible things, just imagine
Oh,
that.
there for sure
It's
were.
like, well, then I just don't see a possible scenario where we can just in a good way describing what a Christian is, what anybody thinks a Christian is, that would be it. That just doesn't compute. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like specifically like doing horrible things throughout history, like I unfortunately as a Christian, I can't exactly say that's foreign to the Christian religion. You know, that's been
Yeah,
something that
right.
we've been
That's not a true
pretty.
Christian, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean this turns into like a no true Scotsman fallacy thing
Hmm.
where you go like, but that one isn't a true Christian.
Hmm.
I but like, you know, if a person, one of the things that like really gets me is when a person says I'm not a Christian, but they insist, no, actually you secretly are. Like there's a form of apologetics that's like, well, don't you know that you are secretly a Christian, or that you are hijacking Christian morality, so you're really a Christian under like the covers, but you just don't know it yet, or something like that, or you're importing and a Christian framework or something like that. And so if someone is saying to you, no, I'm actually not a Christian,
Mhm.
and I would say that's probably a good boundary to lay. Like explicit rejection of the label is probably a good one. But you know, when it comes to like heinous acts or something like that, unfortunately, I don't think there's particularly good precedent to say you're not a Christian if you conduct a heinous act, because that sort of seems like a thing that would rule out an enormous amount of people who we would normally consider Christians, right? Like
Yeah.
the Catholic Church isn't exactly free of controversies of the use of the unjustified use of violence. However, we would still consider the Catholic Church and the magistrates who orchestrated these various things, like the Albigensian Crusades, I think is a particularly heinous example. It's hard to say that the Catholic Church wasn't Christian during the Albigensian Crusades, but more that Christians sometimes do some pretty terrible things. Would probably be the easier way to define it. I mean, you could, if you wanted, say, you know, they're not real Christians, but again, you're using that term, and I want to define who is in my group, and I don't want to include bad people in that group. And so you've moved from a broader definition into like a interpersonal group boundary definition. So, you know, really depends.
Yeah, well, we're kind of trying to go through this definition thing, and we're getting off topic. So let's go ahead and get off more topic. So you mentioned it.
Hell
So
yeah.
like someone might say, okay, well, you are saying that yes, there's been Christians in history that have done bad things, and they've been calling themselves Christians, and people have even been applauding them in the past, like speaking of like slavery, stuff like that. But maybe not today, although that's
You can
supposedly
find guys
coming
like
back.
Doug Wilson,
Yeah, that's
who
apparently slavery
are
is making a
pro-slavery.
comeback. Yeah, surprise, surprise. Awkward. So, yeah, you know, that's that's another thing. Anyway, so so some people might say, okay, so I want a definition of Christianity or Christian that is historical, not just what my specific group, let's say my church or evangelicals at large, or Catholics at large, or just Christians in general at large. Maybe not that, but also a historical idea. So looking back about how people use the word Christian throughout history, and I would assume that people have used the word in a lot of different ways, so that makes things difficult. But yeah, if you are going to say you're going to try to make a historical definition, then it does seem like you maybe might have to say that those types of people are Christian. At the same time, you also might say, hey, no, watch out, John. Nice, tricky comeback there, but not happening with me, because I'm defining Christian on what Jesus did. And Jesus was a very nice guy. And well, he was God, of course. He was all just and good. So that's what we're going to define Christian as. Although technically they're not just as good. Maybe we're just going to define it as the disciples, because those were definitely, if anybody's a Christian, the disciples were Christians, right?
Except
I guess.
Judas.
Yeah, except Judas, but he stopped being a Christian or something. I don't know. Maybe he lost his salvation. Who knows? Or I don't know. Maybe you can stop being a Christian. I guess I haven't thought about, like, can you lose your Christianity or gain it? Is that a possibility?
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm being a little goober right now. Yeah. So what do you think about that? Like defining Christian as, I guess, what the earliest Christians were in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the difficulty is we don't exactly know a whole lot about how early Christians defined in groups and out groups, right? So a person who has just come from paganism to Christianity is probably importing a lot of assumptions about gods and religion and things like that into their current worldview, assumptions we would just be totally unfamiliar with, and is sort of operating with an idea of what Christianity is that is sort of alien to what we would now think of. Is that person a Christian?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, is there a participation in Christian community enough? It's all very difficult, right? And it sort of loops back to this problem that we've been talking about, where, you know, what are those core things? So is it, you know, you believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord and that he was raised from the dead, like in Romans, Paul says, you know, if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart he was raised from the dead, then you shall be saved. So is a person who does that saved? But then you look at Corinthians and Paul is talking about, you know, how the sexually immoral will not inherit the kingdom of God, or whatever. And so it's like, oh, so Paul seems to think there are additional boundary markers that we need to be drawing, and not necessarily just these ones. And so there's often an attempt, and I think it comes back to that point you were making earlier about certainty and needing certainty and wanting certainty and not being able to handle ambiguity and just not knowing answers to things that often comes in. And it's, you know, deeply unsatisfying in many ways to have to look into the face of the cold hand of religious necessity and come away with conclusions that are sort of uncomfortable, like, oops, turns out we have very porous boundaries and we can't say who's in and who's out, and we're basically just drawing arbitrary lines no matter what we do. And every time we try to draw a new line, like, you know, you could define Christian and fill up an entire book with caveats and specificities. And like, one thing that I think makes a good definition is being concise, right? Like being able to explain it quickly and easily to someone. Because I was recently reading a book, this is completely unrelated to Christianity, but I was reading a book about the neurodiversity movement and what neurodiversity means. And that's also like a very difficult term to define, and who is in and who is out, and who it includes and who it doesn't. Like, does it include people with neurodevelopmental disorders and neurodegenerative disorders, or just neurodevelopmental? And it's like, well, who knows? And it was a whole book, like a whole ass 200-page academic book about attempting to define this term. And by the end of it, there still wasn't a coherent definition given. And so you can go on for a very long time, but I think in terms of, I guess my bias is toward pragmatism and usefulness. Mm-hmm. In terms of pragmatic use, I think being concise and being quick, even if you draw boundary markers that are too restrictive or too porous, I think being able to convey meaning in a short period of time is also important to it.
Yeah. So we got a message from Apocalypse here. You keep having people on that I know.
Oh,
Hi,
yeah.
John. Yeah. Isn't
Hi,
that fun?
Also John.
John DePew. There you go. Look at that. Or maybe he was talking to himself. So
could be.
Maybe not. Yep. Here's another side topic here. Why do people want to be called a Christian? So this is really interesting. I think this is also important as far as like a bias type of thing. And, if you realize, hey, this is why I want to be called a Christian, and it's completely arbitrary. And what I mean by Christian is I walk on the moon, and that makes you feel good and part of a community. Cool. That's great. I'm glad you feel part of a community. But when we're talking about like, how should we define it, or what is a good way to define it? Maybe that's not as good of an idea to do it that way. Yeah. But anyway, so, people might feel like they belong if they call themselves a Christian. It might signal to other people that you're decent, trustworthy, you have shared moral values, being one of the good people. I get questions all the time on my channel because I talk about things that are controversial among Christians. And people are like, are you a Christian? It's like, what does that have to do about with whether you can lose your salvation? Like, what are we talking about here? And but yeah, so but in some ways I have to say yes, because if I don't say yes, then I'm a bad person. I'm an outcast, and I should not be listened to, right? But it also prevents suspicion, exclusion, family conflict, professional, relational friction. And some people just want that lovely nostalgia, that religious feeling of going back to the old days. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, just me personally, the reason I want to be called a Christian is because I quite like Christianity. I quite like the Christian tradition, and I would like to be a part of it. And I sort of made a conscious decision to be part of the Christian tradition. And so, like, at the end of the day, that is why I want to be in it, because I like the tradition, and I like what it means to be associated with that tradition in a lot of ways. And so there's just that. But also, like you mentioned, there are so many reasons why you'd want to do, and a huge one is in-group signaling. If it's also just like a massive, it's social lubricant in a lot of ways, right? Like when you're in a situation in which things are socially difficult, you don't know many people, coming in and being like, I'm a Christian. If another person is a Christian, wow, look, you already have so many things in common. Maybe, it depends on what type of Christian you are, but you at least have a sort of shared idea of what you are and what you believe. And so it helps with community formation and things like that. Conformity is often necessary to form groups. And so if you want a good way to get people all on the same page, religion's a pretty decent one. And so, like, why do you want to be called it? Because it makes your life easier, and it helps you make friends and get to know people that you might not be able to in another circumstance or something like that.
Right. Yeah. But I appreciate that. But for 100% clarity there, we just got to remember that those good reasons, or maybe bad reasons, depending on what it is, is not good enough justification to, well, I mean, as I said before, you can do whatever you want. Okay. But if you're trying to find what a good definition is, how we should define Christian, maybe that's not the best way to go about it. And realize that while you're thinking about that is, when I think about, hey, defining Christian as being someone that walks on the moon because it makes me feel good, when I make an argument that agrees with that notion, and I get this good feeling of confidence because I get that good feeling, it's like, well, maybe your argument's not that good, but you just like that argument because it makes you feel good, and that's why you think it's true. So that can be really complicated for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think when you're using like the term to mean walking on the moon, the reason I would say that's a bad definition is because no one uses that to mean that, right? If, however, in a theoretical future, 400 years from now, that becomes what walking on the moon meant because like Buzz Aldrin had communion on the moon or whatever.
That's right.
You know, if that is what the term starts to mean in 400 years, then that would be a good definition. But the reason that's not a good definition is because no one uses it to mean that, right? When you say I'm a Christian, no one would immediately think, Buzz Aldrin, right? They would immediately we're gonna do something about that right now. But yeah, so I would say that like the only reason that I would object to that definition is just because no one uses that in their common lexicon to mean that, and so it's not actually signifying and pointing to something. It's sort of like if you just decide arbitrarily to think pants are a thing you eat with your eggs or something like that. No one uses pants to mean that, and so that wouldn't be a particularly good definition. But
yeah. So on that. So earlier you were talking about, and people did not like it. People did not like it, John, in the comment section. I don't know if that's actually true, but I'm sure they didn't. And earlier you were saying that when you're talking to someone and someone says, "Hey, I'm a Christian," and you just kind of take it, you kind of smiled like, okay. I don't know if that's actually what you're going for. But I don't know if there's just no limits at all to a definition, it can mean just whatever the person wants. That seems like a bad definition, but it also seems like you're okay with that. So maybe talk about that more.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm okay with that from a sociological perspective because it says something interesting about how they are self-conceptualizing religion. It says nothing useful for group formation, right? Like if a person came to my church and said, "Hey, I'm part of this congregation now, and I am a Gnostic, Arian, super combo of all these different religions." In that context, I would say, okay, you can be that, but you can't be that and part of this church. Because this is an Anglo-Catholic church, you need to affirm the creeds. However, when I take off my, I'm in an Anglo-Catholic church, it is part of my duty within this church to enforce the boundaries of the community and uphold the traditions that have been passed down to me. And I put on my sociologist hat, and someone, comes to me and is like, "I'm autistic and I'm also a Gnostic and I call myself a Christian." With researcher hat on, I go, "Well, that's interesting. How did you come to that conclusion?" And I have a lot more curiosity and openness because in that context, my goal is to figure out why someone with autism would call themselves a Christian when they don't meet the traditional like boundary associations that are often associated with Christianity. And so basically with my researcher hat on, I say, yeah, sure you are. But if that guy came to my church, I would say, well, you can think whatever you want, but in this building and in this community, you're not. and that would basically be where I'd leave it.
Okay. And so maybe let's talk more specifically about your beliefs. So
sure.
You were on Kip Davis's channel, which is where I heard about you. And it wasn't mainly about this. It was just a little bit about this. So I'm interested to hear more. But you believe Christianity is true. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I would say I can say the Nicene Creed without crossing my fingers behind my back.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So tell me more about this. Do you
Yeah,
think
the
that
the
um
distinction
uh
the distinction is I do not think I can say that and historically prove it. I do not think it is possible to use the documents of the New Testament or in the Bible
mhm,
to forensically reconstruct the sequences of events that Christians must claim are true,
mhm,
basically in the Nicene Creed, right? Like if you're
yeah,
going to sincerely say the Nicene Creed, you are essentially giving your intellectual assent to propositions that could never be proved by forensic reconstructive methodology. Like
hmm,
the just forensic reconstructive methodology, like the way that we try to reconstruct what happened in the past,
mhm,
is a very type of specific process meant to do one specific thing, which is to have the least likelihood of being wrong when we make an assertion.
hmm,
However, in general, I do not live my life by the methods of reconstructive historical approaches to anything, right? Like when I listen to my grandma talk about stories from the old country, I'm not going to be like going to Ukraine and trying to historically reconstruct what happened there, right? Like I just go, cool, grandma. That's neat. I guess that happened. And so long as it isn't unreasonable,
yeah,
I'll go along with it. Like if my grandma started talking about how she was raising dragons in Ukraine, that might trip a few alarm bells. But
hmm,
with Christianity, I mean, it does make some pretty absurd claims. Like the central absurd claim is that a dead person rose back to life and was resurrected. And I think that that would be something I believe. That is not something I can prove or would even attempt to prove with the materials that we have available. I just don't think that question is answerable with the text that we have, and that's something that you sort of you can decide to trust the Christian tradition that passed down to you, or you could decide to reject it. And for a very, very long time in my life, I rejected it. I was a skeptical rationalist new atheist for most of my
yeah.
adult life, and it's only recently that I reconverted back to Christianity. But I did not convert back because I read an apologetics book and became convinced that this was a good idea
Hmm.
or something like that. Like I did not come away from Lee Strobel's Case for Christ convinced by the argumentation or the J. Warner Wallace's Cold Case Detective. That one gets me because I'm a trained digital forensics investigator. And it's like you are sullying our professional name by making us seem like we are much more incompetent at our jobs than we actually are. But
Interesting. We'll have to have a conversation about
yeah,
that another time, maybe.
yeah.
But see, what you have not thought about is the undesigned coincidences, because
Okay.
this is something that happens in real life. Like if you go to a store and someone's doing a return for like a basketball, and they're like, "Hey, I ordered makeup," and another person says, "Hey, I ordered a basketball and I got makeup." That's an undesigned coincidence. That happens all the time, and it's just very unlikely that it's just a coincidence. It's very undesigned, not on purpose. So, so you just need to look into that
Artlessly, you might say.
artlessly.
Yes,
I don't
the
know who
very,
says.
very precise methodological term with very well-defined boundaries of what makes it, a good tool is artless. Definitely not subjective at all. Um, yeah,
Are you using the word artless, or is that a joke I'm missing?
no, that is a joke frequently used by the undesigned coincidences people.
Oh,
Is a
somehow I've
is
missed this.
a artless coincidence. It's a term I've heard a few times, and
Oh, I
it
don't
gets
know.
me.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, so
I'm not expecting a
the
critique, by the way. That's okay. I'm just making a joke.
I I will say this on undesigned coincidences. There is a good reason that you don't see that forensic reconstructive methodology being employed in day-to-day forensic reconstruction. And it
Interesting.
is because that would lead you to getting a lot of things wrong.
Hmm.
Basically,
Interesting.
it is not a particularly good heuristic for attempting to determine sequences of historical events.
Yeah, but if you have
and
30
generally
undesigned
speaking,
coincidences,
it's used to establish the credence of eyewitnesses,
yeah,
right? The gospel accounts are eyewitness accounts. I'm just going to level with you, man. Eyewitness accounts have issues. People are not always the most reliable narrators of their own experiences.
You're right. You're right.
I'm not a reliable narrator of my own experience. For my podcast, I put out 3 episodes called, Why I Am a Christian, where I tried to explain how I came back to being a Christian. And before I put out the episode, I realized I got a lot of things wrong because I just decided to fact check myself and try to forensically reconstruct things. I got things out of sequence. I got things out of order. I thought I had read books that I hadn't read at the time. I was thinking I read this book in 2017 and this happened and this happened. I checked my reading history. I didn't read it until 2019, and so the way I remember these things and the way that I sort of conceptualize them was not sort of accurate, basically. And that's my own attempts to reconstruct my own personal history. And I got that wrong a lot of the time. And so even if you were to use undesigned coincidences to come back to the idea that these are historical eyewitnesses, it's still even if you were to accept that, which I don't, it only moves the ball back a foot instead of the mile that they want it to. So another good example. So doing forensics work, I often will talk to people about what happened. I'll ask them to explain to me the sequence of events that happened. And then I look through their computer files, basically, and computer files are great, right? Because they all have really precise timestamps and certain artifacts are generated when you click on something and all these things happen. And just basically in my life, I have not found people's attempts to recount the correct sequence of events to be particularly accurate. Sometimes it's because they're ashamed and they don't want to admit that they did something stupid. Sometimes it's because they were under extreme amounts of stress and it's all just a blur and they're trying to figure out. Sometimes they're just genuinely mistaken. Sometimes they don't remember and they think they do remember. It's in general, even if you were to prove it were eyewitness accounts, you still have to contend with the fact that human memory is pretty fallible.
Yeah, well, they haven't responded to that. You just got to read that part of the book, John. Okay.
No. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm just kidding. So that's very interesting. Appreciate you saying all that. So let's see here. So just for some clarity there. So you seem like you're saying, hey, I can't reconstruct this historically and I can't say this with confidence, but I am just trusting it because that's kind of because I like the Christian faith. Is that the legit
Kierkegaard talks about the leap of faith, and how you will always get to this point in which you will not be able to know with certainty what is beyond the gap. And for a very long time, I was unable to convince myself to take the leap of faith, and I was unable to get over that doxastic involuntarism hump. But for some reason, whatever reason, since then I have been able to. And so I would say I am a Christian because I have chosen to be a Christian and because this is the tradition that I want to be in. And as part of that tradition, you need to accept certain historical truth claims. I accept those truth claims, but I don't accept them in the same way that I would accept a forensics report that I'm reading, right? When I read a forensics report and I go through, I believe that for very different reasons than I would believe something like Christianity. And I don't begrudge people who hear that answer and say, well, that's not good enough for me. I can't be a Christian. It's yeah, fair enough, dude. I can't convince you to do what I have done or experienced the things that I've subjectively experienced that made me get to this point. So yeah, I get it, but I was in that camp for a very long time.
Yeah.
And like my thoughts on apologetics really haven't changed since I was an atheist. So yeah.
All right. So I wanted to respond to some feisty comments here. So this is a sarcastic comment, I believe. I'm a Muslim because I follow the steps of the Prophet Muhammad, but I don't even think that the Quran was history. But following the Muhammad philosophy is enough to consider myself a Muslim. What do you think about that?
Sure, dude. Why not? Right? Like I mean, I have zero investment on who is a Muslim and who is not. So if you want to call yourself one, go for it, dude. Like I don't know.
Well, obviously, what you're trying to say is like, hey, that if someone said they are a Muslim but they don't follow the step, or they follow the steps of the Prophet Muhammad but don't believe the Quran is history in some way, that seems like that goes against what a Muslim is. So what are
I
your
mean, a
thoughts there?
Muslim by whose definition? Right? And this gets back to like the difficulty of definitional, like of pinning things down definitionally, right? Because you could do the same thing with Christianity, and then you ask, okay, well, why is it historical criteria? Why is it that you need to do this? And the answer is because that is the consensus of most Muslims, right? The reason that this is generally the accepted thing is because this is the group consensus. But if group consensus shifts or changes over time, then that could be a legitimate definition. And so like what he's saying there is, you know, I identify as this thing despite not fitting with the traditional boundary markers of this thing. And so it's like, all right, dude, if that's what you want to do, then do it. But as in terms of like, you know, I don't know if any other Muslims would accept you as a Muslim, and you need to be willing to contend with that part of it. But you know, call yourself whatever you want. I don't really care.
Yeah. So my brother-in-law texts me. He doesn't want to comment in the chat. Crazy guy. And he says, bruh, he talking about Kierkegaard. Hell yeah.
I'm much more into Simone Weil. Simone Weil is really, really my go-to for most things Christian. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Simone Weil. But anyway, yeah, Kierkegaard's cool.
I don't know what that is, so maybe my brother-in-law can tell me later.
Simone Weil is a French philosopher.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, like how being an employee at Google doesn't mean getting a, or maybe does mean getting a job at the Crab Shack.
I don't know. Is the Crab Shack owned by Google? Is it a subsidiary of Google?
It could be, I guess. Technically,
I mean, but in there, you're invoking. So, like in our society, being employed by a specific company is invoking things like legal contracts and obligations and various different types of, you know, infrastructure behind that isn't involved in Christianity. So like, you know, when I say I am my child's parent, you know, you can't say I am my daughter's father. Like you wouldn't be able to say that. Only I can say that. But that's because in our society, there are duties, obligations, rights, legal boundaries that you need to consider, legal obligations. So if you don't feed my daughter, you are not in trouble. If I don't feed my daughter, I am in legal trouble. And so like when you're invoking terms like employee, you are talking about a completely different category, right? Because Christian isn't a legal category in our society. If it ever became a legal category, like you needed to be a Christian in order to get a job or something like that, then yeah, you would have to be much stricter on your definitions. But like in our current cultural context, that's just not how Christianity works. That's not what Christianity is. It it doesn't have any legal implications so far. Like, I mean, non-discrimination implications for religious belief, maybe. But even then, it wouldn't matter if you were a heretical Christian or if you just called yourself a Christian for those terms, because it's sort of an arbitrary religious discrimination, not specifically against Christians. But
and by the way, Simone says we're diametric opposites by I'm a fan of Simonis or Simone. So it seems like Simone's not a fan of Simonis, maybe. I don't know.
Sad.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna have to live with that ambiguity there, John.
Yes, I will live with the ambiguity of this.
Alrighty. So now for question 5. No, I don't know. How much time do you have, John? I don't want to be rude.
I've got time.
Okay, cool. This is fun. So, so you've kind of talked about Nicaea functioning as a boundary marker.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, hey, it seems like there is some things in Nicaea that maybe we shouldn't accept, or most people would have a problem with. Say that someone does not actually find that as a good argument. Maybe that someone thinks that if you're a Christian, you have to accept that because that's what everybody at the time of Nicaea came to believe.
And my headphones just died.
Oh, okay.
I need to reset them. Sorry.
That's all right. I forgive you. All right. Let's see here. I got to make up some notes here.
Still not getting anything. 1 second.
That's all right. Take your time. Yep. So, side notes. So,
okay, we're good.
Awesome. No more side notes. All right. Okay. Not that it means not like supposed to have this conversation here, but no, I like Simone Weil on account of her also being a Simone, despite me being a rationalist, not a mystic. So I don't know what any of that means, but cool.
Simone Weil train. Hell yeah. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, so to sort of answer your question about the Nicene Creed being a boundary marker, I personally use it in my day-to-day life for the community that I'm part of.
Okay.
But if you're not trying to be part of my community, whatever, right? Like if you are specifically coming to my church and wanting to be part of the church, then it's like, okay, this church has rules, right? And one of the rules is that if you want to be part of this church and this church community, you have to adhere to the Nicene Creed. And so if you are LDS and you come to my church, you can sit in the church, you can participate in the church. You will not be welcome up to communion, and you will not be able to become a member of the church until you assent to the Nicene Creed and get baptized and all that stuff in a Trinitarian formula. And so for me, in a sort of practical local community sense, yeah, sure, the Nicene Creed is a useful functionary boundary marker. But in terms of would I ever use that in my research? No, I would never use the Nicene Creed in my research unless I was specifically, I use the Nicene Creed all the time, but I don't use the Nicene Creed to say you aren't a Christian or you are a Christian. I use the Nicene Creed to see, okay, what sorts of things about Christianity do you agree with or not agree with? Because it's just a helpful standard that you can assess someone against. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, appreciate that answer there. So True Shepherds, $20. Wow, I really appreciate the support. That's very kind. Big fan or bug fan of the channel, has helped wrestle through doubts. For me, I am conservative on core doctrines, but I am more loose on other things. I'm more in line with Dale Allison. I think Mere Christianity, in my opinion, is good. I actually haven't read Mere Christianity. I'm a bad Christian in that regard, even though everybody talks about it. And I'm a big fan of Dale Allison. Yeah, he's really cool.
Yeah, he's cool.
I should have him on the channel. His recent books seems to be pretty good. But yeah, thank you so much, True Shepherd. That's very kind of you. So if somebody participates fully in Christian worship and community, but does not affirm core doctrinal claims like resurrection, virgin birth, divinity of Jesus, are they still Christian in any meaningful sense? Because it seems like there's something really missing with that.
I think there's a sense in which they are a Christian, but for the way that most Christian communities define themselves, I would say probably not. Right? If you go to like I don't know, in Canada we have the United Church, which is like our super liberal church, like theologically liberal, also socially liberal, but like you would probably be fine there, right? That Christian community would accept you, but one like mine probably would not. And so if you do all that at my church, but you still like actively tell the priest, I don't believe in the virgin birth or affirm any of these core doctrinal claims, like the divinity of Jesus, they'd be like, okay, well, you can be here, you can participate, but like just so you're on the same page as us, you're not part of this community, because this community is defined by this hard delineation or this set of boundaries. And so in some cases, this is a useful thing to call yourself. Like when you're quickly trying to explain to someone. So in this case, you're going to worship, you're participating in the community, you are like, doing Christian things. Telling a person casually, yeah, I'm a Christian, to mean I participate in Christian religious ritual, I think is fine. But like when it comes to delineating whether you are in or out of a certain group, that I would say that is going to be largely dependent on the group. And so in some cases it might be legitimate, some cases it wouldn't be. But also if you're just trying to quickly convey that you participate in Christianity to a random person, then sure. For a while I called myself a Star Trek Christian, in the sense that I was interested in Christianity the same way other people were interested in Star Trek. Where, they read the lore, they watch every episode, they learn the languages, but they don't actually believe Star Trek is real or true. For a while I called myself that, but I wouldn't, at that time I did not consider myself a Christian. But I would occasionally tell people that I was, because I would need to explain to them that I was busy Sunday mornings.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So obviously you're thinking of kind of like depends on the situation, what you're asking, the questions you're asking while you're asking it, which is something you've talked about this whole time. I could see a situation though where it's like, well, I want to map my definition of Christian onto how God sees what a Christian is. And that is like, well, you might say like the church doesn't have authority to decide who a Christian is, or an individual person, but God, if there's anybody, God gets to decide. He's got the authority, right? And so we just have to, I guess, look at the Bible and figure out what God would see as a Christian, and then that would be what is a Christian. So what do you think about that line of reasoning?
I mean, that line of reasoning is trying to sidestep the problem of ambiguity, and you have not sidestepped it. You just created, you have gone from one subjective authority to a different subjective authority, right? When you read the text, you will still be subjectively interpreting the text. There is no way to objectively tell what God actually thinks about something, right? Because your interpretation of a text is still, at the end of the day, an interpretation, and you still have the problem of subjectivity. And so a lot of times this is an attempt to try to get out of a problem that you really can't get out of. And it's to pretend that you are able to negotiate yourself out of a problem that everyone faces, but you don't want to admit that you're facing it. And to that person, I would quote one of my favorite lines from No Country for Old Men, which is, you should admit your situation. There would be more dignity in it. Like, right? You should be just like, the reality is you haven't solved the problem of subjectivity. You cannot determine what God actually thinks, because we have not had that defined for us. And, God does not write in the stars what his thoughts are. There is no good way for us to get an objective referent for what that means. No matter how you try to define it, you will always be defaulting back to another like form of subjectivity. It's just you've decided to not call this form of subjectivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting. So you're saying that how we define what God thinks is a Christian ultimately
Is
ends up
also
being
subjective
us.
and arbitrary.
Yes, is based off of what we think are our subjective opinion. But maybe it's like I'm going to go with what I think is the most probable. And maybe you think, hey, there's some issues with that line of logic, but maybe somebody doesn't agree with you. Maybe think the Bible is dictated, okay? And
Yeah.
God did not write on the stars, but write in like what 5,000 different manuscripts or something. I don't know how that would
Yeah.
work. But if that's the case, then maybe you could say like, hey, it dictated, and I'm just going with what's most probable. Maybe not the certainty, but most probable, because if you look at the Bible, we read it this way, and that's what it comes with. So if you assume all of those, what you would consider leaps in logic,
Yeah.
do you think that would be a good definition for that group of people?
No. Like you still haven't got out of the problem of subjectivity, right? Because you are even if you were reading it in the original Greek, even if you solve the like many manuscript issues that we have, like there are lots of classic unsolvable problems with the manuscript traditions, right?
Yeah.
Like the synoptic problem is called the synoptic problem for a reason. It's not called the synoptic solution. And so really you're not going to be able to define your way out of that. You yourself are in a context that you cannot remove yourself from. You will read things, whether you like it or not, through a subjective filter of yourself. There is no way to get objectivity out of an inherently subjective process of interpretation. And if you think you are mostly just kidding yourself. But yeah.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate you mentioning that. So, okay, so that's that. You think you've destroyed every argument, and my audience thinks no, but that's okay. We'll keep moving.
Whatever.
Yeah, no, nobody's actually said it, but they reject your opinion, I'm sure.
What's the phrase? A prophet is always rejected in his hometown, or something like that.
You could say that, yeah, for every single situation.
Yes.
Perfect. So
they hate me because I speak the truth. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, there you go. Right, right. So some might say that definitions need to help explain stuff, where you're really just saying words that don't really have any meaning. This would be like if you called yourself a bench. So we kind of already talked about that there. Yeah. It has to explain something. Let's see here.
Yeah, like the explanation is taken from consensus, right?
Yeah.
Like it's taken from the reason that any word means anything to you is because it means something to you in your sociological context, right? The reason that when someone says gay, you think homosexual and not happy is because in your current context, that's what people mean when they use the term. Like words themselves don't have inherent meaning. They have meaning derived from a negotiated process that you engage with your surroundings.
Appreciate that. So what if we took it, and this is maybe like an easier one, but what if we said like this is just whoever a Christian is, whoever Jesus ends up saving, right? Saving from hell and going to heaven. That's what a Christian is.
Sure. Why not? Right. Like, okay. Until that happens and we have some way of discerning that, it's not going to be a particularly useful definition. And some people are universalists, and so that would mean everyone's a Christian, even if they don't want to be a Christian. So that would also throw a wrench into things. But anyway, yeah.
Appreciate that. Okay, so let's see here. Is there anything we've talked about, we haven't talked about, that you think is worth mentioning?
I think we've been pretty thorough.
Yeah. But there's more to be thorough about. We could talk about how the word Christian is used to promote, exclude, stigmatize, control, dominate others. So
Yep.
that's a very important topic. It's kind of like talking about how it's being misused. To
Yeah. I mean,
um,
it is like all terms that delineate social boundary markers. Um, Pretty powerful when it comes to communities, right? Like, so other words like American is also pretty powerful for doing the same things. And the reason that who is and who is not a Christian is powerful is because society cares about what Christians are and what they aren't. And so, whenever you get any definition of a word that excludes people from a community, you get the potential for abuse. And I just don't think there's a way out of that situation. I don't think there's a way to solve that problem, because no matter, like, even if you were to say we are going to have the most expansive definition of Christianity that we could have, that could never be used to abuse anyone or never be used to exclude anyone, we would basically just invent a new term on top of it to do the same thing, right? Like, okay, you don't have Christian, we now have Schmischen, and that's going to serve the same function of policing internal boundaries, and that's going to have the same function of forcing people out of our group and ostracizing them or othering them, and then using whatever tools in society we have to punish them for not being part of the in-group, is basically going to happen regardless, I think, of whether or not you're talking about Christianity. Because even in places where you have majority Christians, you, instead of using Christianity or non-Christianity as the delineating marker, you will use some other category like class or race or sex or gender or whatever.
Yeah, and it's interesting from a historical perspective that we don't have a lot of early Christianity, but we still see a lot of this othering, excluding. Even like very early on, Irenaeus was a pro at it, and Eusebius as
Paul was
well.
doing it. Like, Paul in
Mhm.
Galatians is arguing with this group of people who he thinks have perverted the gospel, who have been misleading the Galatians. And he's saying, no, these people are wrong about what it means to be a Christian. We are the Christians. This is what Christianity means, right? Like, that was basically happened since Christianity became a thing. Because Christianity is an exclusivist religion, it basically becomes one of those tools to divide people based on arbitrary features and drive wedges through places, exclude people, and things like that. And I think that's sort of a feature of Christianity, and one of the reasons, like, if you read secular historians of Christian origins and they ask one of the reasons why Christianity was so successful, they will say because it's exclusivist. And so in Bart Ehrman's book about the rise of Christianity, he points this out, that when you convert a pagan to another pagan religion, they basically, now you got a guy who believes in two pagan religions. But when you convert that guy to Christianity, you have no pagan religions and only Christianity. And so, it's sort of, and that is what makes it spread so easily and so quickly, is having those sort of exclusivistic boundaries in it. And so we probably wouldn't even have Christianity today if it didn't have those, if it didn't have the ability to discern in groups and out groups and unify people in the way that it did.
Yeah. I find it interesting how the word has been used, and specifically in this context. So early on, the word Christian is often used to say that you are loyal to a specific correct doctrine, which is interesting, is like whether or not that was actually believed before. I think you get a lot of that around the time of Nicaea. There's an aspect of obedience to the right authority, as you have Constantine and company essentially saying like, hey, you have to believe these types of things if you want to, I guess, be part of our group or be a church leader or something like that. Calling yourself a Christian is saying, hey, I'm obedient to this authority, Constantine, whatever, whether or not the authority should or shouldn't be in charge. It's an indication of that you're part of the legitimate community. And then naturally it ends with stigmatizing, looking down on others. And it's formally cut you off from the Christian community, which was deeply intertwined with daily life. So that's really interesting too, is like, it's not just a set of beliefs. It's not just, hey, I'm going to be a good person. It's not like I'm just going to go to church. Like, to call yourself a Christian was to say, hey, this is I'm not a historian, so I'm trying not to say anything wrong, but it's associated, like you can't receive baptism, Eucharist, communion in the recognized church. You, as I said before, there's a loyalty aspect. There's like a social aspect as well, where it's like, hey, you are, I get maybe like, I don't know, I guess there's kind of like today, like a friend group in a way, where like this is how you associate with, even though it's outside of that religious context. But
there are also norms within the community and stuff like that function essentially as ways to in-group and out-group people.
Yeah. Awesome. Alrighty. Well, I think that is all. Did you have any last thoughts? Anything else you want to add? Share something that you want people to know about?
So you can, if you for some reason are also interested in the intersection between autism and Christianity, or belief or lack thereof, I have a podcast called Christianity on the Spectrum. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube. That's about it. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on. Really interesting stuff. And for people watching, if the next time you hear Daniel McClellan and CJ Cornway, that when they say, hey, I'm a Christian, you can maybe think twice about being utterly shocked why someone would say that. So thank you so much for coming on here, John, and giving us different perspectives on this topic. It's been a lot of fun, and everybody like and subscribe to both of our channels. But have a good one, guys.